Hello, I'm Lorna Mackay from the Natural Dog Training Academy. Welcome to our YouTube channel. This is our second video, but it's actually the first one that I've done. So I am a newbie at this. And I was thinking about what I was going to talk to you about, and I thought separation anxiety is a pretty important subject for many of us now. It's always been around, but it's grown massively in the last 3 to 4 years. And a lot of that is to do with the fact of COVID, because in the COVID times then we all were out buying dogs. And of course, as we were in lockdown, we weren't permitted to leave the house or to go out very much. In fact, I remember that we actually at one stage were only allowed to take our dogs out for one walk a day. So the result is that many dogs got so used to having people around all the time. When that situation changed and people started to then go back to work or to take part in hybrid working, where they were part in and part home and part in the office, then our dogs didn't understand that because they're dogs, and they suddenly found that they were being left for perhaps a few hours on their own, and they hadn't had that for years. And that has caused a massive issue with separation issues with dogs. But what I thought I would do today is talk to you about a specific session that I attended very recently. Now, it's not to do with someone going back to work, but it is a situation that we come across quite often where this dog lived with a fairly elderly couple, and unfortunately the man passed on about 9-10 months ago, and the dog was left with his wife. Now, the situation had been that the dog had been taken care of mainly by the man. He was the one that made the rules and made the boundaries, and the dog responded to him. Obviously his wife took to do with the dog as well, but she took the nice bits, the soft bits. But anything to do with giving the dog some rules and boundaries, her husband handled. So, as often happens in life, there's a catalyst that changes things. And she suddenly found that she was left on her own and in charge of her dog. Now, the dog was used to having leadership because her husband provided it. But then the husband, as I say, passed on, and it was left with no guidance at all. And the lady did what a lot of people would do. When she was in the early stages of grieving for her husband, of course her dog would be her comfort blanket. And she admitted this herself, that she'd really babied the dog and that it was with her all the time. And of course all her emotions were put onto her dog. And of course her dog responded, because dogs love doing that. You know, the more attention they can get, the more they'll take from you. And she really didn't realise that this was going to be any kind of problem, because, you know, she got on with the dog. It didn't excessively bark at the door or things like that. But then as the months went on and she started to, you know, pick up the threads of a life again, what she found was that she couldn't leave the house. Because even if she just popped out to go to the shops, then the dog would sit at the window and would howl or bark. And she was very fortunate that she had very, very good neighbours, because this can often be a problem if you don't have good neighbours, because the neighbours complain and don't like it, because it can sound very distressing to people outside if a dog's howling. But she did have good neighbours who said, do you realise that your dog, well, the dog's name actually was Maisie. So they said, do you realise that Maisie's barking all the time when you leave? And she had no idea. Because, of course, when her husband was there, this wasn't an issue, you know, because if he went out, then she was there. So it didn't seem to be an issue, but now it was. And when she got in touch with us, what she was saying was that she had no life, that she had to take her dog everywhere. Now, she didn't drive a car. So when she went out to go somewhere, she went out trips and she really wanted to pick up with friends again. And she had to take her dog with her everywhere. You know, the dog was going in the bus and the dog was going in the, in the train. And that wasn't always convenient. And she couldn't even go out and meet her friends for a coffee because she couldn't leave Maisie in the house alone because she howled the place down and barked and was obviously distressed. And this, of course, distressed the owner. So this is very common with separation anxiety. And it's fair to say that separation anxiety only happens in two circumstances, really. One is it only happens with dogs with a more needy, anxious, scared personality. A confident dog doesn't really suffer from separation anxiety. They can cope with being on their own for short periods. So personality drives, the dog's behaviour. But the other thing is it really only happens with owners who tend to humanise the dog and to treat it more like their little baby and give it everything it asks for. And lots of people do that, but you have to have both things in place. It has to be personality and the way you handle the dog. So some of the problems that this lady was having was that the dog was also starting to sit up at the window and watch for her all the time. So it was never resting. It was sitting up at the window, and then even if she was working out in the front garden and she didn't have the dog with her, it would be howling at the window. It was that bad that it just couldn't cope. And of course you have to remember, because the dog had lost what it perceived as his leader, which was her husband, then it was really feeling that it was missing. So it was starting to actually control the lady herself, and it was following her around everywhere, and it was starting to bark at the door. It hadn't done that before. So this was all a big shift. So what we had to do when I first went in, I actually observed the dog first of all. When I walked in the house, I do what I usually do, is if the dog comes rushing up, which it did do, to get attention. I don't normally do that because one of the best ways of keeping your dog calm initially is to actually not pet on demand. And I was explaining this to the owner, that, she was giving this little dog, Maisie, everything it wanted when it wanted it. And that's not what happens in a dog pack. So I started to explain that really she needed to sort of pull back a little bit. Now, the thing with separation anxiety is it does require a little bit of tough love. And it is love. It's important that you realise it is love, but you have to toughen up a bit. It's not necessarily easy to fix, so you have to be absolutely committed, because you have to teach your dog to learn to cope for short periods on its own. Now, this owner, I felt, was actually fortunate because she'd called me in within 9 months of the passing of her husband and this behaviour with Maisie changing. So it wasn't as if it had been there all the time. The dog was able to cope when the husband was around, but what it didn't have were rules and boundaries, and it was really missing those. So I explained all this to her, and one of the things I always ask is where the dog sleeps. Now, it's no business of mine where dogs sleep unless it's a problem, it affects the behaviour. Now, her dog had moved into the bedroom. It didn't sleep in the bedroom before, it slept downstairs. But when her husband passed on, then she brought the dog up into the bedroom, and it was sleeping not only on the bed, but actually under her duvets, her duvet covers. Again, a bit of a comfort blanket for her. So what I did suggest was, I didn't suggest that she got the dog out of the bedroom, because you sometimes have to do things, more gently. And I think that would have been too hard actually on the owner. So I said, why don't you at least work on getting your dog to sleep in its bed on the floor? And she was quite happy to do that. And then that at least is a little bit of a separation. And so we worked on that. And then we worked on simple things like explaining to her that she has to stop the dog following her everywhere. Every time she got up out of a chair and walked into another room, Maisie would be with her. So it was a simple case of just turning around every single time and saying, wait, Maisie. She would stand still and she'd say, wait. Now, it didn't work 100% at the beginning, but it got, as she repeated and repeated and repeated, the dog started to learn to wait. Then I said to her that she would have to start setting up some situations where Maisie was in a different room. But because this lady was retired, she was around quite a bit of the time, but she was very, very into making crafts, and she actually had a craft room where she would do her crochet or knitting or whatever. So there was a room that she could go and separate from the dog. So what I suggested was that she picked half an hour, start off with just half an hour, where she would leave Maisie in a separate room and she would maybe go into her craft room, whatever suited her, for half an hour, so that the two of them were separating in the house first of all. Because that's the important thing. You have to get your dog used to just not being with you, both when you're in the house and when you leave the house. But you want to start doing it gently. So we started to set up those situations. Now, at first, Maisie whined. She didn't bark too much, but she whined and she scraped at the door. And, you know, I said to this lady that you have to just ignore that. Or you have to actually kind of just quickly go in and, you know, very firmly correct the dog's behaviour. Very firmly just say no and walk out again, not make a big deal about it. So this went on for a week or so. And then what she had to do was she had to start slowly but surely setting up situations where she left the house. Now remember, this lady didn't have a car. It's much easier if you've got a car sitting out in the drive, because you can actually just put on your coat, put on your shoes, and believe you me, that's all you need to do, and your dog knows you're going. And you are very calm and you say nothing. And most people can just maybe start off going out and sitting in their car for a wee while. But, you know, this lady didn't mind. She just went out and actually just turned the corner and kind of sat out there. But she also had, it was quite good actually, she also had a hut in her garden where she potted plants and did all sorts of things. So she says, I'll just go to my hut and spend more time in there. So it didn't matter where she went, as long as she was closing the door of the house and leaving the house. So Maisie knew she was going out. Maisie didn't realise she was only going to the hut at the bottom of the garden. So you can set it up whatever way suits you. So she started doing that. Now it was tough at first, because she started to maybe get 5 minutes and then Maisie would be starting to cry. And the important thing is that you don't just rush back immediately. Obviously, you have to work out, is your dog getting very stressed, or is your dog just doing a wee bit of crying and a bit of barking to call you back? So you've got to judge it. You would know if your dog was getting too stressed. So if she had to come back, she again just opened the door just a little bit and just very firmly said no to Maisie. And that was all. And then closed the door and walked back out again. And it's about building this up and doing it time after time after time, so that Maisie learns that her whining and crying isn't going to get you to run back, because that's what she's hoping will happen. So if you do come back because you're worried about the neighbours and what have you, then, you know, your dog isn't getting used to it. And all you need to do is be firm. It can take quite a time. And when I finished working with her, Maisie had managed to get that she could stay on her own for over half an hour. Now, if a dog can stay for half an hour, 40 minutes, it's not too difficult for it to stay for an hour on its own, because dogs have no concept of time. They don't know how long an hour is. The only concept dogs have is whether their tummy rumbles. So, you know, 1 hour, 3 hours makes no difference. What you have to get is your dog calm and not stressed, and start to learn, the dog starts to learn that you are going to come back. So it's a case of repeating and repeating, and you need lots of patience with separation anxiety, lots. You need to be consistent, and you need to be patient, and you need to realise it's not a quick fix. So, and this lady was, because she wanted to keep her dog and she wanted a life back. So we worked at it for quite some time, and she's now managing, she was in touch with me recently, and she's now managing to get over an hour, which is great. And that's going to keep getting, you know, longer and longer, as long as you keep up all the other things about, you know, stopping the dog sitting up at the window, following you round the house, all the other things that we talked about. So that was a success, and it was a case study that I got a lot of pleasure out of, because there we had a lady who not only had gone through a massive trauma by losing her husband, but she was being traumatised by not being able to get out because she was so upset about the state of her dog. So, you know, it was a really good session, good case study, and I hope you get some information from it. And I hope it resonates with some of you out there, that you really must learn to separate a bit from your dog from day one. So thank you very much for listening, and please subscribe to our YouTube channel, and I look forward to speaking to you again.